I had no idea what was going on at the time and spent many sleepless nights doubting my husband. This was almost 10 years ago. I was in my 30s and had only recently married the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Even before we got married, my husband was always busy with work. I knew life with him wouldn't be easy, but I never expected it to be this lonely. He was rarely home, and when he was, his exhaustion was evident. At first, I tried to be understanding, allowing him to rest whenever he was home. But as time went on, my patience wore thin. I longed for his attention, for the warmth and love that a newlywed couple should share. But instead, he seemed more distant than ever. Whenever he was home, I found myself growing frustrated, taking out my resentment on him. He tried to soothe me, but when he saw that his words did little to ease my disappointment, he began to ignore me altogether. "I'll settle down soon, and then we'll go to that island you love," he would always say. But the trip never happened. His work seemed to be more important than me. I couldn't help but blurt out, "If that's the case, don't force yourself to come home. I'm tired too, and seeing you so exhausted just makes me sad." No matter how many painful words I threw at him, he never reacted the way I expected. He didn't argue back. He didn't even try to explain. He just listened, sometimes with a faint, tired smile, as if he had already accepted that our marriage was crumbling. And then I started to feel it too, the overwhelming sense that we were slowly falling apart. One day, after another one of his countless business trips, I found something that made my heart sink, a hotel receipt and a membership card tucked away in the pocket of his suit. It was from a hotel near our house. The date on the receipt? The same night he was supposedly out of town. And worse, he had accumulated points, more than one night's worth. Dread filled my chest. My husband was well-respected, a successful businessman, and quite popular among the women at work. The pieces fell into place. Had he found someone else? I was heartbroken. I spent my nights wondering why I had to suffer while he found comfort elsewhere. To distract myself, I started going out more, making plans with friends on weekends, pretending I was fine. For a while it worked. The laughter, the company, it all masked the pain. But eventually I grew tired of the act. No matter how many people surrounded me, I felt empty. It was then that I knew, perhaps it was time for both of us to be free. We were no longer husband and wife in spirit. We were just two people avoiding each other, coexisting under the same roof without truly seeing one another. I had convinced myself that he would be happier with someone else. And so I made my decision. I texted him, "Will you come home early today? I need to talk to you." His reply came instantly, "I need to talk to you too. I'll try to leave as soon as possible." His quick response made my heart pound. Was he planning to ask for a divorce too? The thought sent a chill through me. That night, he came home at 9 p.m., looking thinner than before. His eyes still held kindness, but there was an invisible wall between us, one that had been building for years. As I spoke, he barely met my gaze. He remained silent, nodding occasionally, but his lack of words only fueled my frustration. Why wouldn't he say anything? Why was he making this harder? Finally, I broke. "I know about your girlfriend," I blurted out. To my surprise, he didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at me, then smiled. "What do you know?" he asked in a strange, almost teasing tone. For the first time in ages, I laughed. Despite the painful situation, despite everything we had been through, we laughed together, like we used to. After that, we talked. Really talked. It was as if acknowledging the truth had lifted the weight off our shoulders. "I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he admitted. "But let's stop hurting each other." We began sorting through our belongings, deciding who would keep what. The memories were bittersweet. I watched as my husband, who usually held on to things for years, threw away our shared possessions without hesitation. "This is my atonement," he said quietly. "Take anything you want." As we packed up our lives, I noticed his hands tremble. His eyes looked misty, but he refused to let the tears fall. And that's when I realized he was hurting too. Later that night, after everything was packed away, I took a long bath, hoping to clear my mind. When I emerged, he was waiting. Without a word, He climbed into bed beside me and pulled me into his arms. "This is weird," I murmured. "I feel bad for your girlfriend." "Just one more time," he whispered. "I want to be by your side." I stiffened. His body trembled slightly, and I realized he was crying. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. But as I held him, I noticed something else. His body was thinner than I remembered. "You've lost weight," I said, concern filling my voice. "I've been cutting weight," he admitted, exhaling deeply. I studied his face. Something wasn't right. He wasn't just tired, he was unwell. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked again. His response haunted me. "She likes me like this." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he truly meant. Who was she? Was it his new lover? Or was it someone else entirely? For years, I had convinced myself that he had moved on to someone else, that I was the only one suffering. But maybe, just maybe, there was a truth I had overlooked, and perhaps I would never truly know. I felt the sadness creep back in. He's doing it for her. If he enjoyed being with her so much that he even lost weight, why couldn't he just forget about me completely? Why did he still hold on to fragments of our past? I forced a smile, trying to keep the pain at bay. No need to cry, I told myself. This is the last day. Or are these tears of relief? To break the tension, I blurted out something sarcastic, words I didn't even need to say. "You're still the same." To my surprise, he responded gently. "I like that part of you too." His voice was soft, almost nostalgic. Then he said something that would stay with me forever. "I wish you a happy life from tomorrow. I'll be praying for you, wherever you are." And just like that, he fell asleep. His gentle snores filled the room. He was always like this, moving at his own pace, never rushing, never explaining too much. Even at the very end, I stared at him for a long time before whispering, "I hope so too." That night, I fell asleep with a strange sense of finality. The next morning, I overslept. The exhaustion of the past days had finally caught up with me. When I finally woke up, my husband was gone. The space beside me in bed was empty, and the house was eerily quiet. As I walked into the living room, my eyes landed on an A4-sized envelope sitting neatly on the table. My heart pounded as I picked it up. Inside, I found a bank book and a stack of documents. My hands trembled as I pulled everything out. And then, I saw it. The divorce papers. His section had already been filled out. All that remained was for me to sign my name and submit them. A lump formed in my throat as I flipped through the bank book. There was an unusually large sum of money in my name, far more than I expected. It wasn't just a standard divorce settlement. It felt like atonement. Something was wrong. Why would he go to such lengths? Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. Disconnected. I tried again. Nothing. It had been canceled. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. He had disappeared. I spent days searching for him. I called his parents, his friends, anyone who might know where he went. But everyone gave me the same vague response. "I don't know. I haven't heard from him. Maybe he just needed a break." It didn't make sense. If he had simply run off with another woman, why would he resign from his job? Yes, his workaholic self had actually quit his job months ago. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. If he had truly moved on with someone else, why go to such extreme lengths to erase himself from my life? Why did no one want to tell me the truth? I was exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, physically. I had spent months preparing for a divorce, but I never expected this. With my husband gone, I was left with only questions. No answers. No closure. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in our home anymore. Everything reminded me of him. The way the morning sunlight hit the living room, the scent of his cologne that still lingered in the closet, the faint coffee stains on the kitchen counter from the mornings we barely shared together. I needed to escape. And so I did the only thing I could think of. I packed my bags and traveled to the island we had once visited together. It took almost an entire day to reach the remote island. Only around 3,000 people lived there. It was quiet, untouched by time, filled with endless blue skies and the rhythmic sounds of waves crashing against the shore. The first time I had come here was with my husband. I still remember how he stood beside me, watching the ocean as he said, "Once my work settles down, we'll come back here." That promise had never come true. Now I was here alone. I missed him, but maybe what I needed was this silence, this solitude. With the money he left me, I rented out our old house and started a new life here. It was risky, leaving everything behind, but I knew I couldn't stay trapped in the past. And yet, no matter how far I ran, the mystery of his disappearance followed me. I sat on the beach one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky burned with shades of orange and pink, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Why did he leave so suddenly? Why did no one tell me where he was? Why did he look so much thinner? I thought back to his final words. "I'll be praying for you, wherever you are." It almost sounded like a farewell, not just from our marriage, but from this world. Had I missed something crucial? Had there been something deeper hidden beneath his distant smiles and quiet acceptance? There were too many strange things, and yet, I could no longer ask him about them. I would never know, and perhaps that was the hardest part of all. I had planned to spend my days on this quiet island relaxing, healing, and letting go of the past. At first, I kept to myself, adjusting to the slower pace of island life. The locals treated me as an outsider, but I didn't mind. I had enough assets to live comfortably without working, yet doing nothing only made my loneliness heavier. So I decided to work, not for survival, but for a sense of purpose. I started assisting elderly neighbors with their daily struggles, fixing small things around their homes, running errands, listening to their stories. Slowly, I was accepted into their community, becoming just another islander rather than a visitor passing through. It was peaceful. It was quiet. It was almost enough. Almost. Then one day, everything changed. One afternoon, a coworker mentioned that a new client had arrived from the main island. He came here for medical treatment, she explained. Well, not exactly treatment. There isn't much to be done for him anymore. He chose this island to spend his final days. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I knew the island had no real medical facilities, just a small clinic and a local doctor. Why would anyone come here in such a condition? Was he running away from something? I wasn't assigned to him at first, but when the new client specifically requested a visit and I was the only one available, I agreed. Still, unease settled in my chest as I made my way up the hill to his home. The house was small and secluded, sitting on a hill overlooking the ocean. It had been abandoned for a long time and only recently renovated enough to be livable. But barely. The walls were thin, the windows drafty. It hardly seemed like a place for someone to spend their last days. I rang the doorbell, my pulse quickening. A faint voice called out, "Come in." I stepped inside, sunlight streaming through the window. At first, I couldn't see his face. It was backlit, his figure just a shadow against the golden light. "It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir," I said politely. Then he turned toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. My husband. No, my ex-husband. We stared at each other in stunned silence, as if the universe had played some cruel trick on us. Finally, he smiled, that same mischievous smile from years ago. "You found me out." I felt like I had been thrown into a dream. What are you doing here?" I couldn't even form the right words. He wasn't supposed to be here. Everything I had heard at work, it didn't make sense. Wasn't he supposed to be with her? Wasn't he supposed to be happy? My husband gently grabbed my hand and pulled me to sit beside him. His warmth was familiar, yet distant. I had so many questions, but before I could ask, a knock at the door interrupted us. I quickly wiped away my tears and opened it. An elderly man stood there, his expression kind but surprised by my tear-streaked face. He gave a small bow before stepping inside and sitting next to my husband. "How are you today?" he asked in a soft voice. My husband replied casually, as if nothing was wrong, as if this wasn't the most surreal moment of my life. I quickly realized this man was the island's only doctor. The pieces started falling into place. My husband had come here to die. After 10 minutes of small talk, the doctor got up to leave. I couldn't hold back any longer. I rushed after him, my heart pounding. Please, I begged. He's my husband. Tell me what's wrong with him. The doctor hesitated, his expression unreadable. I can't tell you anything without his consent. I felt my heart sink. But then, perhaps out of pity, he sighed and added quietly. He won't be able to walk by himself very soon. It would be a shame for him to spend his last days alone. Please be there for him. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me.
How? Why?
And then another question slipped into my mind, one I hadn't dared ask yet. What about his girlfriend? But deep down, I already knew the answer. She wasn't here. When I returned to the house, my husband was waiting. His expression was gentle, almost expectant. You're back. I couldn't hold back anymore. My emotions crashed over me like a tidal wave. I can't live without you, I whispered. Let me stay with you tonight. He didn't protest. The house was barely furnished, just a few bags, a couple of futons. It was empty, much like how I had felt for the past year. That night, for the first time since we discussed divorce, I slept beside my husband. We didn't talk about his illness. We didn't talk about the painful parts of our past. Instead, we reminisced about the life we had, the small happy moments, the places we had once dreamed of visiting together. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. Did you bring her here before? I asked softly. He only laughed, his usual way of avoiding painful topics. But the way his laughter faded told me enough. Something had happened. Something tragic. And maybe I would never know the full story. So I didn't ask again. The next morning, I made my decision. I informed my employer that I needed time off. I want to spend what time he has left with him. And so I did. I took my husband, now too weak to walk far, around the island in a wheelchair. I showed him places we had visited before. I showed him places I had discovered on my own. I showed him the world he had come here to leave behind. For the first time in years, we were just together. No resentment. No misunderstandings. No regrets. And yet, I couldn't help but think. I wish we had been this close when we were married. Even after our divorce, the feelings I had for him never disappeared. If anything, they only grew stronger. But what could I do now? Nothing would change. So, I decided to stay by his side as a friend. The days passed quickly, but his illness progressed even faster. His strength deteriorated until he could no longer take walks, even the short ones he had once looked forward to. Simple tasks became difficult. And then, he began to sleep more and more. The doctor visited every day, and though my husband was no longer in pain, I couldn't accept it. I refused to believe this was normal. I refused to believe that he would leave me so soon. So I stayed. I never left his side. Whenever my husband woke up, he would sometimes finish the dream he had just been in. Other times, he would tell me memories from long ago, as if they had just happened yesterday. I cherished every word, every sleepy smile, every fleeting touch. But with each passing day, he woke up less and less. When he stopped speaking altogether, I continued talking to him, reading his favorite books, describing the beautiful scenery outside, whispering stories of the world he could no longer see. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of the setting sun, I wanted to tell him about it. I reached for his hand, but it was cold. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in a way that felt unnatural. Panic surged through me. I called the doctor immediately, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Please hurry. I could feel my heart being ripped apart by the helplessness of the moment. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, that he would be fine, that the doctor would come and tell me I was wrong. But when he arrived, he took one look and said softly, "His blood pressure has dropped quite a bit. Let him go in peace." My breath caught in my throat. "No," I whispered. "I believe he wants you to stay with him," the doctor continued gently. "I'll be close by, but this moment is for the two of you." And with that, he stepped back and left us alone. I knew this moment would come. I had always known. But knowing didn't make it any easier. Tears blurred my vision as I leaned in, whispering, "I was so lucky to have met you. There were hardships, but the truth is, I have always adored you." I held his hand tightly, not wanting to let go. Then, his fingers gently curled around mine. It was faint, medically impossible, but I felt it. He was still here. For one last moment. And then, as the final breath left his lips, he was gone. A quiet death. A quiet goodbye. I couldn't stop crying. But despite the pain, I was grateful. Grateful that I had been there. Grateful that he had not been alone. After his passing, I was so busy with arrangements that I didn't even have time to grieve. The funeral, the burial, the paperwork, it all blurred together. It wasn't until I returned home, exhausted and hollow, that the weight of his absence finally crashed down on me. I sat in our empty home, surrounded by his belongings, and realized something. A pile of letters had accumulated on his desk, stacked high like a mountain. With trembling hands, I reached for the first one and recognized the handwriting immediately. My husband's handwriting. He had written dozens of letters, each one carefully dated, each one meant for me. The first letter began on the day of our reunion. "I never expected to see you again. I had hoped, but I never thought it would actually happen. I wonder if you noticed how surprised and happy I was. I tried to hide it, but knowing you, you probably saw right through me." His words made me laugh despite my tears. He had always been like this, hiding his emotions, acting distant, but inside, he had never changed. As I read through the letters, I noticed something heartbreaking. At first, his handwriting was strong and clear. But as the days passed, his writing grew shakier, sloppier, shorter. A visual timeline of his illness. Yet I kept reading until I reached a letter that made my breath stop. "I lied to you. My illness began when we were still married. I found out there was nothing they could do. The treatment I tried as a last hope failed. It only made things worse. So I made a choice. I wanted you to be free. I didn't want you to spend the rest of your life taking care of me, watching me waste away. I planned the divorce to push you away. And when you suspected another woman, I didn't correct you. I let you believe it. Because if you hated me, you wouldn't stay. I thought I could leave you with enough money to live comfortably. That way, you wouldn't be tied down by my illness. I never expected you to follow me here. I never expected to see you again." Tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. All this time, it had never been about another woman. It had never been about falling out of love. He had done it to protect me. I clutched the letter to my chest, my heart aching with emotions I couldn't put into words. "You fool," I whispered through my sobs. "How could you do this alone?" A knock at the door startled me. I quickly wiped my tears and opened it. The doctor stood there, holding a sealed envelope. "What brings you here, doctor?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He handed me the letter, his expression kind. "He asked me to post a letter every day," he explained. "But before he fell into a coma, he wrote this final one. He asked me to give it to you when you returned home." I took the envelope with shaking hands. I thanked the doctor, then closed the door, needing to be alone. Sitting down, I carefully opened it, my breath unsteady. The letter was short, just a few words, but they were the most important words he had ever given me. "Thank you. I love you." Tears slipped silently down my cheeks. We had lost so much time. We had spent so many years apart. But, in the end, our hearts had never stopped being connected. "I love you too." As I whispered these words, I glanced at my husband's portrait. For a brief moment, I could have sworn his lips curled into a small smile. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe he really heard me. Decades have passed since my husband's death, and yet, I am still here. I never left the island. I never wanted to. Over the years, I was officially recognized as an island resident, and this place has truly become my home. I built a grave next to where his house once stood, the same house where we reunited, where we shared our final days, where I held his hand as he took his last breath. That was the day I knew I would never leave. Every day, my husband used to sit by that window, looking out at the vast ocean. Even now, I believe he still does. One day, I will join him there. But until then, I am at peace. I am surrounded by his memories, his love, and the quiet beauty of the life we shared. And in that, I am happy. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. I'll see you in the next video. Please feel free to comment below if you like this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.